When people think of legendary fighter pilots of World War II, names like Erich Hartmann or Adolf Galland often come up. Disciplined men who became symbols of German air power. But there was one pilot who stood apart, not just for the numbers he achieved, but for the kind of person he was. Hans-Joachim Marseille. He wasn't the model officer. He was reckless, playful, and sometimes careless. He loved jazz, fast cars, and late nights out. To his superiors, he looked like trouble. But when Marseille strapped into the cockpit of his Messerschmitt Bf 109 over the blazing skies of North Africa, something remarkable happened. He became one of the most gifted fighter aces of the entire war, a young man who could take on overwhelming odds and win. This is the story of the Star of Africa, a pilot who defied expectations, mastered the art of aerial combat like few others, and whose life was as brief as it was brilliant. Today, we'll look at the rise and fall of Hans-Joachim Marseille. Hans-Joachim Marseille was born on December 13, 1919 in Berlin. He grew up in a family that, like many in Germany, was marked by the aftermath of World War I. His father, a career officer, instilled discipline and a sense of military tradition, but Hans was never the kind of boy who naturally fit into strict molds. Even as a student, he was rebellious, charming, and often distracted, far more interested in music, girls, and adventure than in following rules. When he joined the Luftwaffe in 1938, it wasn't out of ideological loyalty to the Nazi regime. In fact, Marseille was known to be indifferent, even dismissive of the politics swirling around him. For him, flying wasn't about nationalism. It was about freedom, excitement, and challenge. This would put him at odds with the rigid expectations of the state, which demanded obedience, conformity, and a loyalty to Hitler that Marseille never truly embraced. His time in flight school reflected this tension. Instructors found him talented but reckless. He was impatient with drills, sloppy with procedure, and often distracted by nightlife in Berlin. More than once, his career nearly ended before it began. He had a reputation as a brilliant pilot who simply didn't care for discipline. At one point, his commanders considered washing him out of the Luftwaffe entirely. Yet, despite his flaws, there was something undeniable about his skill. In the cockpit, Marseille displayed instincts that couldn't be taught. His reflexes, his ability to judge speed, angle, and distance in the chaos of a dogfight, and his natural confidence in the air set him apart. Even when he didn't respect authority, the Luftwaffe recognized that they had a rare talent on their hands, someone who might become a decisive asset in the war that was rapidly approaching. For Marseille, the uniform and the swastika were more of an obligation than a calling. He served the state because that was the world he was born into, but he never internalized the ideology. His loyalty was not to the Nazi regime. It was to flying, to his comrades in the air, and to his own pursuit of mastery as a pilot. This uneasy relationship with the state would follow him throughout his short but remarkable career. By 1941, Hans-Joachim Marseille had proven himself in combat over Europe, but his performance was inconsistent. He had victories, but also a reputation for being unreliable and hard to manage. His commanders, frustrated with his lack of discipline, transferred him to Jagdgeschwader 27, a fighter wing operating in North Africa. For many pilots, this might have felt like exile. For Marseille, it was the beginning of his transformation. The Desert War was unlike the battles over France or Britain. The skies above Libya and Egypt were vast, the air was clear, and the fighting was brutal but straightforward. It was in this harsh, unforgiving environment that Marseille's unique style of combat began to shine. Unlike many of his fellow Luftwaffe pilots, Marseille wasn't obsessed with rigid formation flying or textbook tactics. He fought with intuition. He relied on instinct, fluid maneuvering, and lightning-fast decision-making. Where others saw chaos, Marseille saw opportunity. He would dive into combat with astonishing accuracy, picking off enemies in rapid succession, sometimes scoring multiple victories in a single sortie. His peers called it luck. Soon, they realized it was skill. By mid-1942, Marseille's reputation was spreading. He wasn't just another German pilot. He was becoming a legend. In a single day, September 1st, 1942, Marseille shot down 17 Allied aircraft, 17 in one day. No other German ace achieved such a feat in the Desert War. Allied pilots began to recognize his name, and even those who fought against him admitted his extraordinary ability. But what made Marseille stand out wasn't just the numbers, it was the way he carried himself. He treated enemy pilots with respect. He didn't see them as faceless enemies, but as fellow aviators, risking their lives in the sky. On more than one occasion, he even risked his own safety to protect or assist downed opponents. In a war defined by brutality and ideology, Marseille showed a rare kind of humanity. This earned him admiration, but also suspicion from the Nazi state. He wasn't the poster boy the regime wanted. He didn't care for politics, he hated Nazi propaganda, and he refused to join the party. To the men who flew with him, though, none of that mattered. He was their comrade, their protector, and their ace. The man who could turn the tide of a battle with his sheer presence in the air. By late 1942, Hans-Joachim Marseille had reached the height of his fame. At just 22 years old, he had racked up an astonishing 158 confirmed aerial victories, nearly all of them against Western Allied pilots over North Africa. To his comrades, he was not only the finest marksman in the Luftwaffe, but also a symbol of defiance against the rigid mold of military life. To his superiors, however, he remained a problem, a pilot too talented to ignore, but too independent to control. Despite his disdain for Nazi ideology, the regime tried to make use of him. He was awarded the Knight's Cross with oak leaves, swords, and diamonds, one of the highest honors in the Third Reich. But behind the medals and the ceremonies, Marseille remained restless, even disillusioned. He cared more about his fellow pilots than about the state that decorated him. Then came September 30th, 1942. On what should have been a routine escort mission, Marseille's aircraft suffered catastrophic engine trouble. Smoke filled the cockpit, and though he managed to guide his stricken Messerschmitt back toward German lines, he was forced to bail out. In the chaos, Marseille struck the tail of his own aircraft, either breaking his neck or rendering himself unconscious. His parachute never opened. The Star of Africa was gone in an instant, at just 22 years old. For his comrades, his death was devastating. The man who had seemed untouchable in the skies had been claimed not by an enemy pilot, but by mechanical failure and tragic misfortune. In the weeks that followed, German propaganda turned him into a martyr, but to the men who had flown beside him, he was remembered less as a Nazi hero and more as a gifted young man. Rebellious, flawed, brilliant. A pilot who fought with unmatched skill, and a comrade who had looked out for his friends even in the darkest of times.